The Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabean Revolt, also known as the Maccabean Rebellion or the Hasmonean Revolt, was a Jewish rebellion against the Seleucid Empire that took place in Judea during the 2nd century BCE. The revolt got started in 167 BCE when the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes made some decrees that banned Jewish religious practices and ordered people to start worshiping Greek gods in the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This act of religious persecution led to a rebellion started by Mattathias, a Jewish priest, and his 5 sons, most notably Judah Maccabee, who became the leader of the Jewish rebels known as the Maccabees or Hasmoneans. The Maccabees used guerrilla tactics against the larger and better equipped Seleucid army, and they were successful in several key battles, including the Battle of Emmaus in 166 BCE and the Battle of Beth Zur in 164 BCE. In 164 BCE, the Maccabees took back Jerusalem and rededicated the Second Temple. This is celebrated during the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. The revolt continued until 160 BCE, when the Seleucids granted the Jews religious freedom. However, the Maccabees kept fighting for political independence, which they achieved in 142 BCE under the leadership of Simon Maccabeus, Judah's brother. The Maccabean Revolt is a pretty big deal in Jewish history because it was the last time Judea was an independent Jewish state before the modern era. The Hasmonean dynasty, which was set up by the Maccabees, ruled Judea until 63 BCE, when the Roman general Pompey the Great took over. The revolt is seen as a triumph of religious freedom and Jewish identity against foreign oppression and assimilation. The Islamic Conquest. The Islamic conquests refer to a series of military campaigns and expansions undertaken by the first Muslim caliphates during the 7th and 8th centuries CE. These conquests started shortly after the death of the Islamic prophet Muhammad in 632 CE. They were led by the Rashidun caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, and later by the Umayyad Caliphate. The Islamic conquests were driven by a combination of religious fervor, political ambition, and economic incentives. The early Muslim armies, made up mostly of Arab tribesmen who had joined together under the banner of Islam, were on a mission to spread their faith and establish a vast Islamic empire. They initially set their sights on the nearby Byzantine and Sasanian empires, which were worn down by years of fighting each other. The conquest started with the invasion of Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, and quickly spread to Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. By 642 CE, the Sasanian Empire had fallen, and the Muslims controlled a significant portion of the Byzantine Empire's eastern territories. The Muslim armies then pushed westward across North Africa, reaching the Atlantic Ocean by 711 CE. They also made some incursions into Anatolia, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. One of the most important events during the Islamic conquest was the Siege of Jerusalem in 637 CE. This resulted in the city's peaceful surrender to the Rashidun Caliphate under the leadership of Caliph Umar. The conquest also saw the decisive Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE, where the Muslim army defeated the Byzantines, cementing their control over the Levant. The Islamic conquest changed the political, religious, and cultural landscape of the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe and Asia. They helped Islam, Arabic, and Islamic culture spread quickly across a lot of territory, and they left a big mark on world history. The Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars primarily fought between Christians and Muslims in the Middle East from the 11th to the 13th centuries. The main goal of the Crusades was to take back the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, from Muslim control and to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the region. Pope Urban II kicked off the First Crusade in 1095, calling on Western European knights to take up arms and defend the Byzantine Empire against the Seljuk Turks. This led to the capture of Jerusalem in 1099 and the establishment of Christian states in the Levant. Later Crusades tried to strengthen and expand these states, but faced more and more resistance from Muslim forces, especially under Saladin, who recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. The Third Crusade, led by notable figures like Richard the Lionheart, King Philip II of France, and Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, tried to retake Jerusalem, but didn't succeed. Later Crusades, including the Fourth Crusade, which was controversial because it sacked Constantinople, and the Children's Crusade, which didn't achieve much, deviated from their original purpose. The Crusades had a big impact, including more trade and cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East, the Catholic Church's growing power and influence, and deeper religious and political divisions between Christians and Muslims. The impact of the Crusades is still felt today in the relationship between the West and the Islamic world. The Albigensian Crusade. The Albigensian Crusade, also known as the Cathar Crusade, was a 20-year military campaign initiated by the Catholic Church against the Cathars, a religious group in southern France from 1209 to 1229. The Cathars had beliefs that the Catholic Church considered heretical, including rejecting the sacraments and believing in a dualistic universe. Pope Innocent III called for a crusade after Pierre de Castelnau, his legate, was killed in 1208. The crusade, led by French nobles and supported by King Philip II Augustus, began with the massacre at Béziers in 1209, where the locals were killed indiscriminately. The Crusaders took Carcassonne and laid siege to Cathar strongholds like Minerve, Termes, and Montségur. The turning point came in 1213 at the Battle of Muret, where the Crusaders defeated the Aragonese and Catalan forces allied with the Cathars. The Treaty of Paris in 1229 basically put an end to the Cathar movement, which weakened Occitan culture and gave the French monarchy more power in the region. The Albigensian Crusade marked a shift in the Catholic Church's approach to dealing with heresy. It set a precedent for future religious conflicts in Europe and led to the establishment of the medieval Inquisition. The Reconquista. The Reconquista, which means reconquest in Spanish, is a historical term used to describe a sequence of military campaigns and battles that occurred on the Iberian Peninsula, encompassing modern-day Spain and Portugal from the 8th to the 15th centuries. The main goal of the Reconquista was to take back lands that the Moors, Muslims from North Africa, had taken over in the 8th century. The Reconquista got underway in 718 with the Battle of Covadonga, where Pelagius, a Visigothic nobleman, beat the Moors in the mountains of northern Spain. This victory was the start of a long process of reclaiming the peninsula for the Christian kingdoms in the north. Over the next few centuries, the Christian kingdoms of Leon, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre slowly pushed the Moors further south. Some key moments in the Reconquista include the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, which was a turning point in favor of the Christians, and the capture of Cordoba in 1236 and Seville in 1248 by King Ferdinand III of Castile's forces. The Reconquista wrapped up in 1492 when the last Moorish stronghold, Granada, surrendered to the forces of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. This event marked the end of Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula and the beginning of a unified Spanish monarchy. The Reconquista had a big impact on politics, culture, and religion, and it shaped the history and identity of Spain and Portugal. It also left a lasting impact on the region's architecture, art, and literature. The Inquisition. The Inquisition was a series of Catholic Church-backed institutions set up to combat heresy, investigate people accused of it, and punish those found guilty. The Inquisition ran from the 12th to the early 19th century and operated across Europe and the Americas. It took on different forms in different regions. The medieval Inquisition got its start in 1184 when it was used to address the Cathar heresy in southern France. It employed traveling tribunals and severe punishments like torture and execution. In 1478, the Spanish Inquisition was set up. It was known for targeting conversos and moriscos, who were thought to be secretly practicing their former faiths. It gained a reputation for its brutal tactics, including torture and public executions, known as auto da fe, which were used to enforce religious conformity and assert social control. The Roman Inquisition, which got started in 1542, was all about countering Protestantism and alleged heresies within Catholic territories. The trial of astronomer Galileo Galilei in 1633 for supporting the Copernican model is a great example of how it affected scientific inquiry. The Inquisition had a huge impact on religion, ideas, and culture. It suppressed different views, made it hard to ask questions, and punished people for their beliefs or ethnicity. Its legacy is still a bit of a hot topic, with people questioning whether it was right to abuse power, challenge religious authority, and protect human rights and freedoms. The 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War was a huge, destructive conflict that ravaged Central Europe from 1618 to 1648. What started as a religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics within the Holy Roman Empire soon drew in other European nations, turning it into a continent-wide war. The conflict started with the Bohemian Revolt of 1618, when Protestant nobles rebelled against the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor. As the war intensified, Protestant countries like Denmark and Sweden got involved, while Catholic powers like Spain and Austria backed the emperor. The war had four main phases: the Bohemian, Palatine, Danish, Swedish, and French phases. Some of the most important events included the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, which ended the Bohemian Revolt. The sack of Magdeburg in 1631, where Catholic forces laid siege to the city, and the Battle of Lutzen in 1632, where Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus was killed. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 ended the war and changed the political map of Europe, establishing state sovereignty. Princes got the right to choose the religion of their territories. The Holy Roman Empire lost some of its power while France and Sweden gained ground. The war had a big impact, with up to 8 million military and civilian deaths. The German states were left in a bad way with lots of poverty and a big drop in population. The 30 Years' War marked the end of religious wars in Europe and paved the way for the rise of modern nation-states. The Shimabara Rebellion. The Shimabara Rebellion was a major uprising in Japan from 1637 to 1638. It took place during the Edo period in the Shimabara Peninsula and Amakusa Islands, which are now part of Nagasaki Prefecture. Amakusa Shiro, a charismatic Christian youth, led the rebels, who were mostly peasants, including persecuted Christians, ronin, and local nobles who were unhappy with the oppressive rule and heavy taxation imposed by the local daimyo. The rebels were initially successful in capturing castles and towns, including Hara Castle. They also repelled early attacks by the shogunate forces. However, the Tokugawa shogunate put together a big army of 120,000 men under General Matsudaira Nobutsuna. The siege of Hara Castle lasted for months, and the rebels were eventually defeated. Amakusa Shiro was executed, and the castle was destroyed. The rebellion's aftermath was pretty rough. The shogunate banned Christianity, kicked out the Portuguese, and implemented the isolationist Sakoku policy. Christians faced more intense persecution, and the population was subjected to increased surveillance and control. The Shimabara Rebellion is a big deal in Japanese history. It shows how religion, society, and politics all played a part in the early Edo period. It shows how the Tokugawa shogunate was determined to keep order and suppress any dissent or foreign influence in Japan. The Jihad of Usman Danfodio. The Jihad of Usman Danfodio was a significant religious and political movement that took place in West Africa, particularly in the Hausa city-states of what is now northern Nigeria from 1804 to 1808. Led by the Islamic scholar and reformer Usman Danfodio, the Jihad aimed to purify Islamic practices and establish a more just society based on Sharia law. Usman Danfodio, a Fulani Muslim, believed that the Hausa rulers had become corrupt and strayed from the true teachings of Islam. He began preaching against the rulers' practices such as heavy taxation, slavery, and the mixing of Islamic and traditional African religious beliefs. In 1804, Usman Danfodio declared a jihad against the Hausa rulers, rallying support from the Fulani people and other discontented groups. His followers, known as the Jama'ah, quickly gained control over several Hausa city-states, including Kano, Katsina, and Zaria. Usman Danfodio's military success was accompanied by a religious and intellectual revolution. He promoted Islamic education, established a new system of government based on Islamic principles, and encouraged the spread of literacy and scholarship. By 1808, Usman Danfodio had conquered most of the Hausa city-states and established the Sokoto Caliphate, a vast Islamic empire. He divided the caliphate into emirates, each governed by an emir loyal to the central authority in Sokoto. The Sokoto Caliphate became a major center of Islamic learning and trade, with its influence extending far beyond its borders. Usman Danfodio's legacy continued through his descendants, who ruled the caliphate until the British conquest in the early 20th century. The Jihad of Usman Danfodio had a lasting impact on the religious, political, and social landscape of West Africa. The Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion was a huge uprising in southern China against the ruling Qing dynasty around 1850 until 1864. Led by Hong Xiuquan, a Christian convert who believed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. The rebellion sought to overthrow the Qing and establish a new kingdom based on Hong's religious and social ideals. Hong set up the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, which attracted followers with his vision of a more equal society. The Taiping rebels were pretty successful at first, conquering a lot of territory in southern China, including the city of Nanjing, which became their capital. The Taiping Rebellion brought about some pretty revolutionary ideas like getting rid of private property, promoting gender equality, and banning opium. However, their strict religious beliefs and harsh treatment of non-believers turned many potential supporters away. The Qing government was struggling to keep the rebellion under control, especially with so many internal conflicts and external pressures. The Qing government changed tactics when they got help from regional militias and European countries, especially Britain and France. The ever-victorious army led by British officer Charles Chinese Gordon was instrumental in defeating the Taiping rebels. The rebellion ended in 1864 with the fall of Nanjing and the death of Hong Xiuquan. The conflict had a huge impact, with estimates of the death toll ranging from 20 to 30 million people. It's one of the deadliest conflicts in history. The Taiping Rebellion really weakened the Qing dynasty, showing it had weaknesses that could be exploited in future. It also had a big impact on Chinese society, challenging traditional Confucian values and paving the way for revolutionary movements in the early 20th century. The Modist War. The Modist War, also known as the Anglo-Sudan War, was a conflict that took place in Sudan between 1881 and 1899. The war was fought between the Modist Sudanese, led by Muhammad Ahmad, who proclaimed himself the Mahdi, or the Guided One, and the forces of the Khedivat of Egypt, which was under British control at the time. In 1881, Muhammad Ahmad declared a jihad against the Egyptian government, which he saw as corrupt and un-Islamic. He quickly gained support from various Sudanese tribes who were unhappy with the way the Turco-Egyptian administration was running things. The Modist forces had some major wins, including taking over Khartoum in 1885, where British General Charles George Gordon was killed. After that, the Mahdists set up their own state, the Mahdiya, which Muhammad Ahmad ruled until he died in 1885. He was succeeded by Abdullahi ibn Muhammad, who was known as the Khalifa. The British were getting more and more worried about the growing power of the Mahdiya and its potential threat to their interests in the region. So in 1896, they launched a campaign to reconquer Sudan. The campaign was led by General Herbert Kitchener, who advanced methodically up the Nile, building a railway to supply his troops. The war's turning point came at Omdurman on September 2, 1898. The British troops, armed with modern weaponry like machine guns and artillery, delivered a decisive blow to the Modist forces. The Khalifa was killed in the Battle of Dvikarat in November 1899, which effectively ended the Modist state. The Modist War led to the establishment of Anglo-Egyptian rule in Sudan, which lasted until Sudan gained independence in 1956. What made this conflict stand out was the British use of modern military technology, which gave them a big advantage over the Modist forces. The war also had a big impact on culture and religion. It was a clash between Islamic revivalism and European colonialism in Africa. The Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion was a violent anti-foreign, anti-colonial, and anti-Christian uprising that took place in China between 1899 and 1901, towards the end of the Qing dynasty. The rebellion was started by the Militia United in Righteousness, also known as the Boxers in English. They were a secret society of Chinese peasants and workers who practiced martial arts and believed in traditional Chinese spiritualism. The Boxers blamed foreign influence, particularly Christian missionaries and Western imperialism, for China's problems. They attacked foreign embassies, churches, and railroads, as well as Chinese Christians and those suspected of having ties to foreigners. The Qing government, led by Empress Dowager Cixi, initially supported the Boxers, declaring war on foreign powers in June 1900. This led to the 55-day siege of the foreign legations in Beijing, which was finally lifted by an international force, the Eight-Nation Alliance, consisting of troops from Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Hungary, Russia, the United States, and Japan. The alliance then went on the offensive against the Boxers and the Qing government, capturing Beijing in August 1900. In September 1901, the Qing government signed the Boxer Protocol, which required China to pay a large indemnity to foreign powers, allow the stationing of foreign troops in Beijing, and grant further concessions to foreign interests. The Boxer Rebellion showed just how weak the Qing dynasty was and how it couldn't resist foreign encroachment. It also showed how anti-foreign sentiment was growing among the Chinese population and how foreign powers were becoming more influential in China. The rebellion was a big deal in modern Chinese history. It marked the beginning of the end for the Qing dynasty and paved the way for the Republican Revolution of 1911.